If you had told me 10 years ago that my marriage would one day feel like living with a polite stranger, I would have laughed and called you crazy. My name is Ethan Walker. I am 41 years old, born and raised in a small town in Ohio, and I have spent the last 15 years working as a project manager for a construction firm in Denver, Colorado. I am not the type to chase drama. I go to work, I pay my bills, I treat people with respect, and I have always believed that what you put into a relationship is what you will get back. For nearly a decade, my wife Rachel and I had exactly that. She is 38 now, beautiful in a way that draws people's eyes without her trying, and we used to be the couple that made other people roll their eyes in envy. We would laugh over morning coffee, hold hands at traffic lights, and steal kisses in the aisles of grocery stores like we were still 22. We had our arguments like anyone else, but we always found our way back to each other. Or at least, that is what I thought. It started subtly, the way cold weather creeps in under a door you thought was shut tight. 4 months ago, Rachel began pulling away from me, not in a dramatic, obvious way, but with small, calculated steps. She started going to bed early without me, claiming headaches or exhaustion from her new job at a marketing agency. I would reach for her hand on the couch, and she would smile faintly, then pull away to grab her phone. At night, I would roll over to put my arm around her and feel her body stiffen, like my touch was a burden she had to tolerate. When I asked if something was wrong, she would give me the same soft but final answer. I am just tired. Ethan, work has been insane. I wanted to believe her, and for a while, I did. But as the weeks went on, her distance turned into a wall. She was getting home later, dressing nicer than usual for work, and spending more time locked in the bathroom with her phone. The woman who used to text me pictures of her lunch just to make me smile now barely replied to my messages during the day. It was as if she was carving out a part of her life that had nothing to do with me. I told myself she might just be adjusting to her new job, maybe stressed about proving herself to her new boss. But deep down, in that quiet, stubborn place where you know the truth before you can admit it, I could feel something else was going on. I did not want to be the paranoid husband who saw shadows where there were none, but there was a growing resentment building inside me. I worked hard. I was loyal, and I had never given her a reason to doubt me. So why was she shutting me out? Each night I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, telling myself I was imagining it. But every smile that felt forced, every touch she avoided, every half-hearted love you before bed was like a drop of ice water running down my back. Something had shifted between us, and I knew that once I found out what it was, there would be no going back. The moment that broke the fragile thread of denial came on an ordinary Thursday afternoon, the kind of day where you think nothing significant could possibly happen. I had gotten home early from a job site because a supplier shipment was delayed, and I decided to be productive while I waited for Rachel to get home. I remembered my phone charger was in her car from when we had driven to the mountains the weekend before, so I grabbed her keys from the kitchen counter and headed out to the driveway. Her car smelled faintly of her perfume, that soft vanilla scent she always wore, but it felt foreign somehow, like it did not belong to me anymore. I reached into the passenger side to check under the seat for the charger when my fingers brushed against a crumpled piece of paper wedged between the console and the seatbelt latch. I smoothed it out without thinking, expecting it to be a fast food receipt or a grocery list. But the header made my stomach tighten instantly. Northfield Women's Health Center. My eyes scanned down to the date. 2 days ago. And then the words, pregnancy test, positive. I froze. For a few seconds, my brain refused to connect the dots. I reread it, hoping I had misunderstood, but the black ink was crystal clear. My hands went cold. We'd not been intimate in months. Months. I felt like the driveway was tilting under my feet. Or 1,000 thoughts flooded in all at once, each one more nauseating than the last. Was it possible she had been hiding something medical from me? Or was the truth the one my gut had been whispering about in the dark? I wanted to throw the paper back where I had found it, pretend I had never seen it, and go back inside like nothing had happened. But my eyes kept coming back to that one word, positive. If she was pregnant, the timing did not add up. Not unless the laws of biology had changed without my knowledge. I slid the receipt into my pocket and sat in her car for a long minute, staring at the steering wheel, feeling my pulse pound in my ears. I could almost hear her voice from the past few weeks. Not tonight, Ethan. I am exhausted. And the lie in those words burned me from the inside out. If she had been with someone else, I needed to know for certain. I was not going to accuse her blindly. No, if this was going to come to light, it would be with facts, proof, and a truth so solid it could not be spun into another excuse. When I went back inside, I placed her keys exactly where I had found them and sat down at the kitchen table, my hands clasped so tightly, my knuckles ached. I told myself this was just the first piece of a puzzle I had not even begun to see the full picture of yet. And if there was one thing I had learned in life, it was that sometimes the worst betrayals hide in plain sight. Until you go looking for them. That night, I could not sleep. I lay in bed beside Rachel, staring at the faint shadow of her profile in the dark, listening to the soft rhythm of her breathing. My mind kept circling back to that receipt like a vulture over roadkill. I replayed the past few months in my head. Every time she had brushed me off, every excuse about headaches, every sudden late night at work that left her coming home well past dinner. The math was not complicated. If the clinic visit 2 days ago had confirmed a pregnancy, then conception would have happened weeks ago, maybe even over a month ago. But that was during the very stretch of time when she would not even let me hold her hand in bed, let alone get close enough for something like this to happen. The more I thought about it, the more that hollow, icy feeling in my stomach grew. I tried to find some way to explain it that did not involve betrayal. Maybe she had taken the test for a friend who was too scared to do it herself. Maybe the result on that paper did not actually belong to her. But the receipt had her full name printed right at the top. There was no misunderstanding, no room for wild theories. The truth was staring me in the face, and it was ugly. I shifted on my pillow and thought about the way she had been acting lately. How she dressed a little nicer than necessary for her job. How her perfume lingered even on days she claimed she was too busy to take a lunch break. How her phone had gone from lying face up on the counter to never leaving her pocket. If I had been paying attention earlier, maybe I would have seen the pattern. But I had wanted so badly to believe that we were still the same couple we had always been. I had been blind because I wanted to be. The irony burned me. Here I was, the husband who had never so much as looked at another woman in all our years together, now realizing that the woman I trusted most might have been living a second life right under my nose. And if the timing was as I suspected, then she was not just lying. She was preparing to tie me to a child that was not mine. The thought made my chest tighten in a way that had nothing to do with love anymore. Lying there, I decided something. I was not going to confront her yet. Not with only a scrap of paper as my weapon. No, if Rachel was going to lie to my face, I would be ready with the kind of truth that left no room for escape. If she thought she was clever, I would be 2 steps ahead. I would bide my time, gather every piece of evidence I needed, and when the moment came, I would drop it all in front of her like a hammer. because once the impossible timeline was proven, there would be no turning back for either of us. The next morning, I woke up before Rachel. I stood in the kitchen making coffee, listening to the sound of the shower running upstairs, and decided right then that I was not going to tip my hand too soon. If I came at her with nothing but suspicion, she would deny it, spin a story, maybe even find a way to make me feel like I was the one losing my mind. No, I needed to move slowly, patiently. Like setting a trap, you only get one chance to spring. I started paying attention in ways I never had before. I noted the time she left for work, the outfits she wore on certain days, and the subtle changes in her makeup. Rachel had always been stylish, but now there were days she looked like she was headed for a magazine cover, not a cubicle. She claimed her boss was pushing for more client-facing meetings, but I could tell she liked the attention it brought her. Her phone was my biggest clue. It never left her hand when she was home. She even started taking it into the bathroom, which she had never done in all the years we were together. I began checking the mileage on her car when she got home. It sounds obsessive, but I needed patterns, not guesses. Some days the numbers matched her commute to work and back. Other days, there were an extra 20 or 30 miles that could not be explained by running errands. And then there were the late nights. Calls I overheard with a tone too soft to be business-related, laughter that faded into a hushed whisper when she noticed I was in the room. Part of me wanted to scream. I wanted to demand answers, force her to say the words I was dreading. But the other part, the colder part, was winning. I told myself that every day I stayed quiet was another day I could gather proof. If she had the nerve to betray me in my own home, then I would have the patience to dismantle her lies one brick at a time. So I played my role. I kissed her goodbye in the morning, asked about her day when she got home, pretended to believe her excuses about traffic or last-minute meetings. I smiled when she looked at me, even though inside I was keeping a running tally of every slip, every inconsistency, every shred of evidence she handed me without even realizing it. I knew that when the time came, I would not just confront her. I would bury her story so deep under the truth that she would not be able to dig her way out. It was a Friday evening when the pieces began to fit together. Rachel had mentioned earlier in the week that she would be working late on a client proposal and probably would not be home until after 9. I nodded like I believed her, kissed her on the cheek, and told her not to overwork herself. But as she backed out of the driveway, I slipped on my jacket, grabbed my keys, and decided it was time to see where these extra hours were really going. I kept a few cars behind her as she made her way across town, careful not to get too close. Instead of heading toward her office, she took a series of side streets that eventually led to a small sports bar tucked between a laundromat and a pawn shop. Not exactly the kind of place where business meetings happen. She pulled into the lot, parked, and stepped out of her car looking like she was going on a date. Hairstyled perfectly, red lipstick I had not seen her wear in months, and that black dress she used to save for our anniversary dinners. From my spot in the shadows, I watched her walk inside. Less than a minute later, a man came through the side entrance and headed straight toward her. He was tall, maybe mid-30s, with a careless sort of confidence. They hugged, but not the polite, quick kind you give a friend. This was longer, familiar. She smiled at him in a way I had not seen directed at me in months. It was a smile that told me more than any receipt ever could. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, feeling my jaw tighten. The man's face was familiar, though I could not place it right away. It was only when he turned to the side that I remembered. Tyler Brooks, someone I had met briefly at a community fundraiser last year. Back then, he had seemed charming enough, The kind of guy who shakes your hand a little too firmly and holds eye contact a second too long. I had thought nothing of it. Now I was watching him lean across a table toward my wife like she was his. They ordered drinks, laughed easily, and leaned in close, their heads almost touching. I stayed long enough to see his hand brush over hers and her not pulling away. In that moment, any lingering hope that I was wrong evaporated. This was no misunderstanding. This was a secret life unfolding right in front of me. Driving home, I kept my headlights low, my mind already moving toward the next step. I had proof now. Not enough to confront her completely, but enough to confirm that the shadow I had felt between us had a name and a face. And if Tyler Brooks thought he could slide into my life without consequence, he was about to find out I was not the kind of man who sat quietly while someone stole from him. By the time the weekend rolled around, I knew I needed more than my own eyes on this. Seeing Rachel with Tyler at that bar had been enough to confirm my gut, but it would not hold up as the kind of proof that ends arguments for good. If I was going to confront her, I wanted evidence she could not twist, deny, or explain away with one of her carefully rehearsed stories. That was when I remembered a name. Megan Cole. She was a private investigator I had met years ago through a subcontractor friend, a woman with a sharp tongue and an even sharper instinct for finding the truth people try to hide. On Monday morning, I called her. Her voice was steady, calm, the kind that made you believe she had heard and seen far worse than whatever you were about to tell her. I gave her the basics. My wife, possible affair, a man named Tyler Brooks. And she didn't ask for emotional details. She just asked for times, dates, and descriptions, like she was already building a file in her head. By that afternoon, we met in a small diner off the highway, the kind of place where no one pays attention to who is talking to who. Megan was in her early 50s, dressed in a plain blazer, her hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun. She listened without interrupting, her pen moving steadily across a small notebook. When I finished, she nodded once and said, "I will find out what you need. And when I give it to you, there will be no room for doubt." I slid a retainer check across the table, and with that, the deal was set. The next week passed in a slow burn. I went about my usual routine, pretending nothing had changed, while Megan worked in the background. She texted me updates in short, clipped sentences, followed her after work, not heading to office. Then, dinner with Brooks, holding hands, and finally, have photos. More to come. Each message hit me like a small jolt of electricity. Not shocking anymore, but confirming what I already knew. And by Friday, Megan handed me a manila envelope thick with printed photographs and reports. Inside were clear shots of Rachel and Tyler at multiple locations. The bar I had followed her to, a quiet park bench where they sat too close to be innocent, and even a daytime meetup at a coffee shop across town. But it was not just the photos. Megan had also dug into Tyler's background, and the picture she painted was worse than I imagined. He was unemployed, living off sporadic gigs, with a history of failed relationships and 2 separate cases of unpaid child support. I sat at my kitchen table that night, the folder open in front of me, and felt something shift. The sadness that had been eating at me for weeks began to burn into something harder, colder. This was not just about betrayal anymore. This was about Rachel tying herself, and by extension, trying to tie me, to a man who could barely keep himself afloat. And if she thought I would let that happen, she had no idea who she was dealing with. It was a quiet Sunday morning, the kind where the sunlight feels soft and the world moves slower. I was at the kitchen table reading the paper, a mug of coffee in my hand, when Rachel came downstairs. She was wearing a robe, her hair freshly washed, and there was a strange mix of nerves and excitement in her eyes. She moved toward me like she was bracing for a reaction. I already knew what was coming, but I kept my face neutral, letting her play her part. See, she sat down across from me, fiddling with the belt of her robe. Ethan, she began, her voice just a touch too sweet. I have something to tell you. Something big. She paused, waiting for me to lean in, but I just took another sip of my coffee and nodded for her to go on. I'm pregnant, she said finally, her lips curling into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I let the words hang in the air, pretending to be surprised. I even raised my eyebrows and asked, "Really? That's unexpected." Her shoulders relaxed a little, like she thought I was buying it. She launched into some story about how it must have happened during one of those rare nights we were together, as if she was throwing me a bone to believe this was ours. And inside, I felt an almost bitter amusement. I thought about the receipt from the clinic, about Megan's photos of her and Tyler, about the man's pathetic history that she clearly hadn't bothered to research. She was trying to sell me a fantasy, but I was sitting there with the blueprint of her entire lie spread out in my mind. I reached across the table and took her hand, just to see the flicker of relief cross her face. "That's huge news, Rachel," I said softly. "We should talk about what this means for us." I wanted her comfortable, wanted her thinking she was still in control. Because once I laid out what I knew, it would all come crashing down, and I wanted her to feel every inch of that fall. She smiled again, this time more confident, already moving on to plans and possibilities. She didn't see the storm building right across the table from her. I sipped my coffee, nodding at all the right moments, thinking about the folder in my desk drawer and the moment it would hit the table between us like a hammer. If she thought this news would trap me, she was about to learn that I don't play the role of the fool. Not in life, and definitely not in marriage. Or, 2 nights after Rachel dropped her big news, I decided it was time. I waited until after dinner, when the house was quiet and she was curled up on the couch, scrolling through her phone. I went upstairs to my office, pulled the thick manila folder from the bottom drawer, and took a long moment just staring at it. Every photo, every report, every detail Megan had dug up was inside. It was no longer just suspicion. It was the truth in black and white. When I walked back into the living room, Rachel glanced up and gave me a faint smile. "What's that?" she asked, nodding toward the folder in my hand. I sat down across from her and placed it gently on the coffee table. "You should open it," I said evenly. She hesitated, then flipped the cover back. The first thing she saw was a photo of her and Tyler at the bar, his hand over hers. Her eyes darted up to mine, but I kept my face calm. "Keep going," I told her. She turned page after page. Photos of them in the park, holding hands in a coffee shop, her slipping into his truck one afternoon. Then came Megan's report. Tyler Brooks, 36, unemployed, history of failed relationships, outstanding child support for 2 kids in 2 different states. Rachel's breathing grew shallow, and the color drained from her face. "Ethan, she started, but I cut her off. "You've been lying to me for months," I said, my voice low but steady. "You've been avoiding me, sneaking around, and now you expect me to believe that baby is mine? Do you know how insulting that is?" She opened her mouth again, but nothing came out. Her eyes flicked between the folder and me, like she was trying to calculate whether she could still spin this into something believable. Okay. I leaned forward, my elbows on my knees. I know everything, Rachel. The late nights, the extra miles on your car, the clinic visit 2 days ago. And now this, I said, tapping the folder. You weren't just unfaithful. You were planning to tie me to a child that isn't even mine. She pressed her lips together, and I saw the fight leave her all at once. Her shoulders slumped, and in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, I didn't mean for it to happen. That single sentence told me all I needed to know. There was no more pretending, no more games. I stood, taking the folder with me. We'll talk tomorrow, but tonight, you can sleep in the guest room. I walked upstairs without looking back, the sound of her muffled sobs following me. For the first time in months, I felt like the ground under my feet was solid again. The trap had closed, and now it was only a matter of time before I walked away for good. So the next morning, the air in the house felt heavy, like even the walls knew something had broken beyond repair. Rachel barely looked at me over her coffee, her hair pulled back, her eyes red from crying. I did not bother making small talk. Instead, I slid a single sheet of paper across the table toward her. It was a paternity test request form I had already scheduled at a local lab. We're going to do this today, I said. My voice was calm, but there was no room for negotiation. She hesitated, staring at the form like it might burn her fingers. Ethan, is that really necessary? She asked, her tone somewhere between pleading and defensive. I just looked at her. If you're telling the truth, then you have nothing to worry about. The silence that followed was its own kind of confession. She finally nodded, but her eyes stayed fixed on the table. At the clinic, she barely spoke. I kept my words short, polite, like we were strangers sharing an elevator. The test itself took only a few minutes. A simple swab and a few signatures. And then we walked out without saying goodbye. I drove home alone, the weight in my chest replaced by a strange calm. I already knew what the results would say, but seeing it in writing would be the final nail in the coffin. When the envelope came a week later, I did not open it right away. I stood at the kitchen counter, feeling the thickness of the paper, the sharp crease of the seal. Rachel came in from the backyard just as I tore it open. My eyes scanned the lines until they landed on the words, probability of paternity. 0%. I set the paper down, looked at her, and said, It's his, which she sank into a chair, her face pale, her lips trembling. Ethan, I made a mistake. She started, but I raised my hand to stop her. No, Rachel, you made a choice, and now I'm making mine. I pulled another document from the counter. Divorce papers I had already had drawn up. I slid them toward her, the same way I had slid that folder of evidence days ago. There was no shouting, no dramatic scene, just the sound of the clock ticking in the kitchen and the quiet scratch of my pen as I signed my part. You can keep whatever you brought into this marriage, I said. But the house, the savings, everything else. We'll handle that through my lawyer. She nodded weakly, not even trying to argue. When I walked out the front door later that afternoon, the sun was bright, the air sharp and clear. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe without that dull ache in my chest. The truth had done its work. All that was left now was to start over. On my terms. 6 months later, my life looked nothing like the one I had walked away from. The divorce was finalized in just under 90 days, clean and without theatrics. Rachel stayed in the rental apartment she had moved into after leaving our house, raising the baby on her own. I heard through a mutual friend that Tyler had disappeared not long after the paternity results came in, leaving her with nothing but bills and sleepless nights. It was not something I celebrated, but I would be lying if I said there was not a grim satisfaction in knowing the man she risked everything for turned out to be exactly what I knew he was. I sold the house Rachel and I once shared and used the equity to buy a smaller place closer to downtown Denver, a place that felt like mine from the first day I turned the key. I threw myself into my work, taking on bigger projects at the construction firm and finally starting the custom home renovation side business I had been dreaming about for years. Without the weight of constant suspicion and resentment, my energy came back. I slept better. I laughed more. Even food tasted different, like I was finally noticing the flavor again. On weekends, I hiked in the Rockies, met friends for dinner, and reconnected with parts of myself I had let fade over the years. I was not chasing anyone's approval, not bending myself to fit someone else's moods. My life was mine again, and every day I woke up grateful for the silence in my home, the absence of lies hiding in everyday conversations. Rachel reached out once, about 3 months after the divorce. It was a short text, "I'm sorry for everything." I stared at it for a few seconds, then deleted it without replying. There was nothing left to say. She had made her choices, and I had made mine. We were not those people from the grocery store aisles anymore, and I was fine with that. Sometimes people ask if I regret not confronting her sooner, before things got so far. I tell them no. Waiting gave me clarity. It gave me the power to walk away with my head high and my future intact. The truth is, revenge is not always about destroying the other person. It is about refusing to let them destroy you. And as I stood in my new home, sunlight spilling through the windows, I realized I had not just survived the betrayal. I had rewritten my life completely, on my own terms.